Welcome to Historically Speaking. Our episode today is Expressions, Sayings, and Proverbs. And my guest here in the studio, a familiar face to everyone, is Tom Leypoldt. And before giving my take on this show, which takes Historically Speaking in a different direction, this was your idea, Tom. So if this bombs, we can lay this at your feet. But why did you want to do a program on sayings and expressions?
Well, as you know, Michael, I've always been kind of taken by wordplay and double entendres and just expressions on where they came from, and I figured you'd be the guy to research that and get all the correct answers. So.
Well, I don't know if they're all correct, but I'm delighted that your inspiration helped me figure out how to do this on air, because for more than 20 years, I used to teach an English department elective called Word Power. And it wasn't just a vocabulary course, it was about recognizing sayings, word origins, stories, and it was just such a fun class to teach. So when you came up with your first 10 words, there you are, Tom.
Hey, look at that.
Look at that. And
picture from the 1900s. Speaking of history,
that's what we call vintage, or retro 80s. So yes, and it just shows you how much you can find online, because of course all Mill River's yearbooks have been digitized.
Right.
So here are your picks in no special order: knock on wood, over a barrel, flash in the pan, peeping Tom, why Tom, smart Alec, toe the line, cat got your tongue, mind your P's and Q's, make no bones about it, cloud 9, bought the farm, and red-handed. So let's start with the first one, knock on wood. What do you think?
Well, people always do that when they say, say if you're driving in a snowstorm, I hope I make it home tonight, knock on wood. Mm-hmm. So it must have something to do with, at one point somebody must have done that for luck. Mm-hmm. So, but where in the line that happened and what era it came in, I don't know. But you still hear it used today.
Oh, you still do, and the British have a variation on this. They call it touch wood.
Is that right?
So to give you a clue to this, the wood is in the same wood as Hollywood. But holly is not holly, it's holy, and it goes back to the true cross. So this goes back more than a millennia plus, when Catholic Christians used to venerate relics. So part of the Crusades 1,000 years ago, people wanted to retrieve pieces of the true cross all over Europe. There were churches, particularly at Cologne in Germany, that purported to have a piece of the true cross. So when people would go on pilgrimages, if they couldn't actually touch the wood, because it would be in a repository called a reliquary, but they would touch that, and it was thought to cure illness, give a special blessing. Okay. So that is probably one of the oldest expressions here. So that was a good starting point.
Well, wood's been around for quite a while. So.
Yes, it has. All right, over a barrel.
That one I have no idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've heard cash on the barrel, so maybe it has something to do with that, where you don't have enough money to pay your debt and it's left you over a barrel, maybe?
It has the sense of being backed into a corner. And like a lot of these sayings, it goes back to a literal sense that in the Navy, they used to put out-of-line sailors over a barrel and whip you. So it's not an enviable position to be in. So when you think of how we use this saying, over a barrel, is a scrape that you don't want to be in.
Oh, that's much more treacherous than I had
thought. And some of these expressions have changed how we use them over time. And this one probably was much more harsh in its original sense. Flash in the pan, I think you can figure this out.
That one I'm pretty sure has to do with military and firing a musket rifle.
That could be. I thought it had to do with the gold rush.
Okay.
And the fact that, when you would be panning for gold, it was a
Right.
flash in the pan. But a lot of times when you Google things like this, and aren't you glad we didn't have Google when we went to school? You
Right.
had to look for more authoritative sources. But a lot of times there are different variations as to what the origin of some of these sayings are.
So if it was just a speck of gold and not a lot of gold, they would just say it's a flash in the pan.
Yeah, and it's also something, when it's a flash in the pan, it's something fleeting or transitory, like a one-hit wonder
Right.
would be a flash in the pan. Now, I can understand why it would be a little touchy about a peeping Tom.
Yeah, I'm always wondering why is it a Tom?
Well, why is it a Tom? Why do we have Tom Turkey? Why do we
Right.
have a Tom Cat? Tomboy, which is probably not an expression, but Tom was once a very common man's name. So you must have, being a Thomas, have known the origin of this story of Peeping Tom.
I don't know. I actually never looked it up.
Okay.
I was going to wait for you to.
This goes back to Lady Godiva, who was the wife of a lord in England somewhere
her,
1,000 years ago. And according to the legend, which is total fluff, to protest her husband's excessive taxes, she told the people that she was going to ride through the streets naked to
heard that
protest. But when this is depicted, she had long plaits of beautiful hair. And supposedly the people were so horrified that they averted their eyes, except the one.
Except for the guy named Tom. I see.
Except Tom. But it's just one of those expressions, it is stuck. So it's not a pleasant thing. It really implies voyeurism today. So, yeah.
Well, we got that, and then also the doubting Tom. So.
Well, Doubting Thomas, I think I've actually preached sermons on Doubting Thomas, because he is the apostle that really doubted the resurrection of Jesus. So Thomas, in that sense, is a very human person because he had doubts rather than just accept this miraculous reality. And it's a whole other story. I happen to tell my congregation what happened to Thomas afterwards. We'll save that for another show.
Okay.
A smart aleck.
Yeah, another one. Obviously, probably some guy named Alec that talked back to his parents or something like that.
It was worse than that. He was a pimp, a petty thief, a notorious criminal in New York City whose name was synonymous with crime. So, and his first name was Alec, so this is probably in the 1840s. So don't be a smart Alec. And as we talked about before the show, there are variations on this one. Don't be as smart, but we can't say the rest of it on air. But it's just that don't be uppity, don't be a know-it-all.
I see. And to think back then, before they had any real means of mass communications, they still got known for that. So think of how much of a smart aleck he actually had to be to be renowned for that.
Well, we say that we live in the age of instant communication, but people read newspapers widely. And, in Rutland, we had 2 newspapers. We had a morning edition, a later edition, and people read newspapers. And when, we've had on various Historically Speakings in the past, we've had the old format of the Rutland Herald when it was 8 columns worth of information. So a lot of times with popular sayings and expressions, we look for them when they first appeared in print. And that's how we get to the origin of some of these. How about toe the line?
Toe the line, being a boxing fan, I've heard that used in boxing, but I've also heard it used in other sayings and situations. But in boxing, it meant if you got knocked down if you could put your toes on a line going down the center of the ring, the referee would let you continue.
Okay.
So,
It also has a military sense that when you toe the line, you're walking a straight
Right.
line. So many people misspell this as T-O-W, and it really is T-O-E. But, with a lot of expressions, I think that as language changes, and we certainly know the extent to which the internet and texting has changed how we represent ourselves, a lot of these sayings you have to explain to people today. So if I said to a class of my students today, you kids better toe the line, I don't think half of them would know.
Probably not.
They would think I was a broken record and
Right.
other things
Yeah,
that don't make
right.
sense to a lot of kids. Now, this never happens to you. Cat got your tongue.
yeah, that, everybody knows that means you were at a loss for words. But how did it come to be that saying?
Well, as a cat lover, I wince sometimes at the horrible things that used to happen to cats and the superstitions, particularly if cats crossed your path or a black cat, cats being associated with witches. So one of the things that was a superstition is that if a cat crossed your path, and if this cat belonged to a witch, it would cause you to falter with your words.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Mind your P's and Q's, Mr. Leypoldt.
I had a math teacher at Mill River that used to say that to me. If your eyes would wander during an exam or whatever, if you're talking.
Yeah.
And that's as angry as she ever got. So she never really got overly angry. But I really don't know.
Are this person's initials LD?
Her name was Mrs. Fisk, I think.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
Are you thinking? Yeah. Good.
We have people in our viewing audience that might not
right.
want to be reminded of that.
Right.
Well, there are two explanations for this, and I think both are viable because they mean the same thing. It means to stay on task, to concentrate on what you're doing. So part of it could be a barman's slang, a bartender slang, mind your pints and quarts.
Okay.
So when you would be dispensing a draft, but there's a pretty good difference between a pint and a quart. But I think it really goes back to, and you and I would have had years of penmanship in elementary school, and the P's and the Q's are loopy letters. So with the Q, it's kind of a backward formation of the P. And I know that in second and third grade, a relic of the old way of teaching is that you would practice your penmanship over and over again through repetition. So I think it probably goes back to just being very, very careful about your letter formation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Make no bones about it.
That one, maybe there was, I don't know. That's unusual.
It's plain, it's direct, it's simple. We're going to talk about this. We're going to make no bones about it. We're going to be direct. It's to the point, targeted, and I think it literally goes to, if you took the bones out of the soup, there would be no danger of your choking. It was ready to be consumed, no bones, ready to go. So that's the sense of that. So
I've always heard that as like, I finish my work and I'm done. I'll make no bones about it.
Well, I think it's like don't ask me to do anything else type thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of it's direct. Don't make a big deal out of it. Now, I could do charades for Cloud 9, but I won't. So Cloud 9.
Yeah, why is it, that's associated with being happy or, I won the lottery, I'm on Cloud 9, but why is it cloud number 9?
Well, supposedly meteorologists used to number clouds by their altitude. So Cloud 9, you're way up in the stratosphere, but it really means that you're more than just happy, you're high, you're buzzed, you're totally blissful. So you think of, the psychedelic revolution in the 60s, you're on Cloud 9.
I see.
So I think through usage, this is one of these things that sometimes when a word that is a slang expression, a lot of these are slang, that some of them become softer with time. And I'll give you an example. We've all felt that we are a basket case at times. Mm-hmm. The origin of that is horrible because during World War I, with trench warfare and people that were blown to bits, we had enough medicine at the time that we could keep double amputees alive. So there were, according to the legend of the story, there were basket cases of people that could not have stood up on their own, so they would have been in hospitals in baskets.
Wow.
So, I'm a basket case because I've got so much work to do. That's a far cry from the horrible reality of when that term first came about.
A lot like some of the nursery rhymes in the early days have horrible origins.
Yeah. Like Rockabye, no, what's the one? Ashes, ashes, all fall down. So how does that start?
I think that's
Ring around the rosy. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy. You know what the beginning of that is?
It's about the plague or something.
The Black Death.
Yeah.
So ashes, ashes, we all fall down. It's that once you develop the symptoms of bubonic plague, most of the time your days were numbered. So
and no one stopped their children from playing that game?
I think what happens sometimes with some of the expressions, as we've said, over time, when you get farther from the origin of how it first came about, it softens it a little bit. Now, bought the farm.
That one, I think that one goes to World War II.
Yep.
Because I like World War II era, and I read a lot about it. And I'm pretty sure that I read that is the wife would have to sign for the farm in case her husband got killed in active duty.
That's very plausible. So it means when you've bought the farm, it means you're deceased. So it became, and that's a good word that we haven't even talked about yet. That is a euphemism. So a euphemism that is very common today. We say, my father passed away. We don't say died, or worse than that, we would say patient expired.
Right.
And that has even been more softened to, my father passed rather than passed away. So that bought the farm, I'm pretty sure, is military in origin, and it is a euphemism.
Okay.
But if you're caught red-handed,
that one, I figure maybe they caught you stealing and they slapped your hand until it was red, maybe?
I think you're caught in the act of murder. So, I watch enough murder mysteries on television that, sometimes the innocent bystander discovers the body and they see there's a dagger next to it and they pick it up, and then the police come in at that point.
And their hand has blood on it.
Their hands have blood on it. So when you're caught red-handed, there seems to be no doubt that you are the culprit. So the red here has a lot to do with blood. In our next set here, we have a variety of sayings. We've all heard these before, but I want you to see, once we articulate these, of how far back you think they go. So, haste makes waste, look before you leap, two heads are better than one, little pitchers have big ears, robbing Peter to pay Paul, hitting the nail on the head, make hay while the sun shines, strike while the iron is hot, beggars can't be choosers, and Rome wasn't built in a day.
A lot of those sound like something Ben Franklin would say, back in the 1700s.
Yeah. Even farther back in time, because, a lot of these sayings, before anybody gets credit for them, it's who publishes them. So there was a man named John Hayward. We have an engraving of him here, and he collected some of these sayings that were already in wide use in 1546. So Shakespeare was born in 1564. So this is the generation before Shakespeare. This is England of Henry VIII. So you see how some of these have just been around since forever. So in the interest of time, we won't go through every one of these. Some of them are pretty explanatory. But as you look these over, are there any that you find a little bit perplexing?
I mean, robbing Peter to pay Paul is the same unfairness as peeping Tom. It just happened to be a Peter and a Paul that got blamed for that forever now.
Actually, you talk about mixing professions here. This is the title of my sermon on Sunday.
Is that right?
Because it goes back to Peter the Apostle
and
Paul, who were the two great Christian figures of the first century. And Paul wrote half of the New Testament with the letters that he wrote. Peter is widely believed to be the first pope. So robbing Peter to pay Paul really goes back to these two apostles, that they're both disciples of Christ. So you're taking from one to put in the other one. It's really part of the same house. But what I think is really interesting about this, and this won't air until after I've given my sermon on Sunday.
Okay.
The St. Paul's Cathedral in London, which is the iconic building with the dome that survived the Blitzkrieg in World War II, that is the cathedral because it's where the bishop lives. But the Queen's death just about a year ago, many royal events are associated with Westminster Abbey, where William the Conqueror was crowned in 1066. The correct name of Westminster Abbey is the Abbey Church of St. Peter. So if you're having a collection in the City of London and it's for the church, are you going to give it to St. Paul or to St. Peter? So this really goes right back thousands of years to these two key Christian figures.
That's interesting. So maybe Thomas said, "Do you have enough money to pay Peter and Paul?" And he said, "I doubt it."
Oh gosh, I've been waiting for this. I expect one more good wordplay between now and the time that we're over. When I would do these with kids, the one that they had the most problem with is little pitchers have big ears.
I've never heard of that one.
Well, maybe it's one of those things that's pretty well obsolete, but it has to do with drinking vessels that had a big handle on the side. And when you think of the old style, let's say, of beer steins that would have a big handle, but the metaphorical meaning is that even though the pitcher is little, the ears might be big, meaning watch what you say in front of kids. Because when we don't think that kids are listening, kids absorb more than what you realize.
Oh, sure they do.
Yeah. Let's touch upon one more set here. Putting all your eggs in one basket, the pot calling the kettle black, the haves and the have-nots. His word is as good as his bond. A word to the wise is sufficient. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Forgive and forget, mum's the word. Give the devil his due, or a finger in every pie.
Yeah, I think I pretty much have an idea of what all those mean, but give the devil his due is kind of an interesting one. Like that probably has to do with debt too, right?
It could. These actually come to us in translation from Miguel de Cervantes, who wrote the first well-known European novel, Don Quixote. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare, and all of these existed in Spanish. They're all in translation, but it shows you that in the 16th century that all of these were in wide usage, and they just became, he gets the credit for them because he was one of the first people to put them in print. And one that I do remember from Latin in high school is verbum sat sapientiae, a word to the wise is sufficient. So that goes back to the time of Julius Caesar. And give the devil his due. This is to acknowledge sometimes that someone may have been unlikable or even downright evil. That person might have done some good. There is a person that I knew in Rutland whose parents fled Mussolini's Italy in the 1930s. And even though we know Mussolini was a terrible tyrant, people would say, well, you know, he drained the marshes, he made good roads, and I can't remember what the third thing is that they alleged that he did. So you're giving the devil his due. So it's an acknowledgement that sometimes a person who isn't good might have one good thing for which that person...
There's a little bit of good in everybody then.
Yeah. Any of the others here?
Well, you know, we still use, you hear it all the time, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
But you know, as old as I am, I've never seen anyone carrying 2 baskets of eggs. So no one really ever follows that one, literally anyway.
Literally, and that's where these expressions are idiomatic, because even though they probably have a literal, when people knew who laid the eggs, they knew the chickens, etc., they bought their eggs firsthand. But the idea is don't pin all your hopes on one thing. So, for example, in all the years that I was working with kids in their college applications, well, I know I'm going to go to Harvard. That's the only school I'm going to apply to. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. In other words, don't think that that's going to be the only way that there is a solution to something. I know that we're not going to get to everything today, so there definitely will be a part 2, but I would like to go to a word puzzle here, because I have a picture here, and this picture will suggest a word to you, and I bet in the remaining 1 minute and 50 seconds that we have remaining on this show today, you're going to figure this out.
So that picture there is related to a saying?
It's related to a single word. So what's the prominent feature in this?
What I was drawn to immediately was the clock.
Okay, the clock.
Yeah.
And the clock is in the tower, and most likely, since this is from the medieval period, the clock would have a what with it?
Pendulum or bell?
A bell.
Yeah.
So clocks, ringing, bells.
I don't know who he is, but his face rings a bell.
It's not Quasimodo. One for me on that one. But okay, here
I had a hunch you'd say that.
we better quit while we're at that one. All right, here is the best hint that I can give you in 55 seconds. 8:50 a.m. and 8:50 p.m. What happens in Rutland?
The 10 to 9.
Yeah, and what do we call that?
10 to 9 horn, 10 to 9 whistle.
Yeah, but what's it called?
An alarm?
No, you be home, Thomas. You're not going to
curfew.
be a curfew. All right, so here is curfew, because in medieval Europe, the bell would ring, and when people heard that, they would come into the town, the city, they would lock the gate, and curfew comes from 2 French words, couvre-feu, cover the fire, because there would be no fires at night. So this is a curfew tower.
That's it. Very
It would ring. It would ring the bell, and we have beat the clock today, and we await part 2.
Interesting. I enjoyed this very much.
Me too.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.